You know what finally made me rethink how I work with wood? It wasn't a new tool. It wasn't a technique video. It was staring at a 1,000-year-old Viking ship in a museum in Oslo and realizing that every plank on that hull was still tight, still fair, still holding its shape after 10 centuries. And I'm over here in my shop fighting boards that cup and twist 6 months after I buy them from the lumberyard. That's when I started digging into what the Norse shipwrights actually understood about wood as a material, not just as something you cut and fasten. And what I found honestly embarrassed me a little, because these people knew things about timber that most of us have completely forgotten. Today, I'm going to walk you through 15 things the Vikings knew about wood that we've lost along the way. And stick around to the end, because I'll share a specific selection trick I picked up from studying Norse boat builders that you can use the next time you're standing in front of a stack of lumber. Let's get into it. What we're really talking about here isn't building technique. It's material intelligence. The Vikings didn't have table saws or thickness planers or kiln-dried lumber wrapped in plastic. What they had was a deep generational understanding of wood itself. And that understanding is what let them build ships that crossed the North Atlantic. Once you see it, you start to realize that most of our modern problems with wood come from ignoring what they already figured out. So let me give you some context, because these weren't primitive people swinging axes at random. The Norse shipwrights of the 8th through 11th centuries built some of the most sophisticated wooden vessels the world has ever seen. The Gokstad ship, pulled from a burial mound in Norway in 1880, was built around 890 AD. It's nearly 80 feet long, and when a replica was sailed across the Atlantic in 1893, it handled open ocean beautifully. The Oseberg ship, dated to around 820 AD, has carvings so refined they rival anything coming out of a modern shop. These builders worked almost entirely with hand tools, axes, draw knives, wedges, and a deep knowledge of the forest they harvested from. They didn't have engineering degrees. They had something better. They had 1,000 years of accumulated observation about how trees grow, how wood behaves, and how to work with the material instead of against it. There's a word in Old Norse, vidr, that means both wood and tree. To them, the material and the living thing were the same concept. That tells you everything about their approach. They never stopped seeing the tree inside the board, and that's exactly where we've gone wrong. Here's the first thing they knew that we've forgotten. You split wood. You don't saw it. When a Viking shipwright needed planks, he didn't run a log through a mill. He drove wedges along the grain and split the log radially, like slicing a pie. This keeps every single fiber intact and running the full length of the plank. The moment you saw through a log, you sever fibers. You create short grain. You weaken the board. A split plank from a straight-grained oak is dramatically stronger than a sawn one from the same log. We traded that strength for convenience the day we started milling everything. The second thing, they could read a standing tree and know what was inside before they ever felled it. A Norse shipwright would walk through a forest and look at how a tree grew. Was the trunk straight and tall with no low branches? That meant long, clear grain inside. Was there a gentle sweep to the trunk? That was a future stem or stern piece. They selected timber the way a sculptor selects stone, by seeing the finished piece inside the raw material. Most of us walk into a lumber yard and flip through a stack without any idea what tree our board came from or how it grew. Third, and this one fascinated me, they read the bark spiral. Many trees, especially oaks, have a subtle spiral in their bark pattern. That spiral tells you how the grain twists inside the trunk. The Vikings used this to predict how planks would behave after splitting. A tree with a strong spiral meant twisted planks, so they'd pass on it or use it for shorter pieces where twist wouldn't matter. I've never met a single modern woodworker who looks at bark spiral, and most of us never even see the tree our lumber came from. But the information is right there on the surface if you know how to read it. Fourth, naturally curved wood is stronger than any curve you can cut. When the Vikings needed a curved piece, a knee brace, a rib, a stem, they didn't steam bend a straight board or bandsaw curve out of flat stock. They found a tree or a branch junction that already grew in the shape they needed. That natural curve means the grain follows the curve continuously. Cut a curve from a straight board and you sever grain lines along the entire arc. The Vikings called these naturally curved pieces knees, and they would stockpile them for years, collecting the right shapes from the forest, the way you and I might collect hardware from a catalog. It takes patience, but the result is a curved member that's 3 or 4 times stronger than one cut across the grain. Fifth, they understood that different species are tools in themselves. They didn't just grab whatever was available. Oak went into the keel and the lower hull planking because it's dense, strong, and durable in water. Pine went into masts because it's lighter and has just enough flex to absorb wind load without snapping. Elm went into anything that would sit at the waterline or below because elm survives underwater almost indefinitely. Ash went into oars and tool handles because it flexes and absorbs shock without breaking. Each species had a job based on its specific properties. Today, most of us pick wood based on appearance or price. The Vikings picked it based on performance, and they were almost never wrong. Sixth, they worked wood green, and they did it on purpose. Fresh felled timber is soft, easy to split, easy to shape with hand tools. An axe moves through green oak like it's a completely different material than the dried stuff we buy. The Vikings would fell a tree, split it, and shape it while it was still full of moisture. Then, as the wood dried in its final shape, the fibers tightened and locked. The joint got stronger over time, not weaker. We've become so dependent on kiln-dried lumber that we've forgotten green woodworking even exists, and we've lost all the advantages that come with it. Seventh, they felled trees in winter. This wasn't superstition. When a tree is dormant, the sap is down in the roots. Winter-felled timber has lower moisture content, lower sugar content, and is far less attractive to insects and fungi. The wood seasons more evenly and is less prone to checking and splitting as it dries. This was common knowledge across every timber tradition in the Northern Hemisphere for centuries. Today, commercial timber is harvested year-round based on market demand, and we wonder why our lumber moves so much after we bring it home. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these shipwright methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called Secrets of the Shipyard, and it covers 16 chapters of Viking and naval carpentry techniques that most woodworkers have never seen. 150 pages of real hands-on knowledge. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. Eighth, slow-grown timber beats fast-grown timber every time, and the Vikings knew it. An oak that grows slowly in a dense northern forest puts on tight, narrow-growth rings. That means denser wood, more consistent grain, and greater strength per inch. The old-growth forests of Scandinavia produced timber that modern plantation oak can't match. When you look at the planks on the Gokstad ship, the growth rings are incredibly tight, sometimes 15 or 20 rings per inch. Compare that to a modern red oak board from a managed forest, where you might see 4 or 5 rings per inch. It's a completely different material. The Vikings chose the slowest grown trees they could find, and it made everything they built better. Ninth, they seasoned wood patiently and never rushed the process. Air drying was the only option, and they understood that wood needs time to reach equilibrium with its environment. A thick oak plank might season for a year or more before it was used in a hull. They stacked it carefully with air circulation on all sides. They didn't try to speed it up. Compare that to modern kiln drying, where we force lumber to target moisture content in days or weeks. Kiln drying works, but it introduces internal stresses that air drying avoids. The Vikings let the wood tell them when it was ready. 10th, pine tar. This is one of the great lost preservation methods. The Vikings coated their ships and outdoor structures with pine tar, which is made by slowly burning pine roots in a covered pit. The tar doesn't just sit on the surface like a modern film finish. It soaks into the wood fibers and preserves them from the inside out. It's antifungal, water-resistant, and it can be renewed indefinitely. A pine-tarred surface doesn't peel or crack the way paint and varnish do. It just slowly weathers and gets recoated. We replace this with synthetic finishes that look good for 2 years and then fail catastrophically. 11th, they built for movement, never for rigidity. Wood moves. It expands when it's wet, contracts when it's dry, and it does this across the grain, far more than along it. The Vikings designed their ships to flex. Hull planks were lashed to frames with spruce root lashings or fastened with iron rivets through slightly oversized holes. The whole structure could twist and breathe with wave action. A rigid hull would crack apart in heavy seas. A flexible one survives. In our shops, we fight wood movement constantly with glue and clamps and rigid joinery. The Vikings embraced it. 12th, radially split planks shed water. When you split a log radially, the growth rings in each plank run roughly perpendicular to the face. Water that hits the surface rolls right off because it's hitting the edge of the rings, not the flat face. A flat sawn board, which is what most modern lumber is, has growth rings running parallel to the face. Water soaks into those ring layers like a sponge. The Vikings knew this intuitively. Every plank on their ships was radially split, and it's one of the reasons those hulls lasted so long. We mill lumber for maximum yield from each log, which means most of what we buy is flat sawn, and most of it absorbs water far faster than it should. 13th, the right wood needs no coating at all. The Vikings used certain species in certain applications precisely because those species could handle the exposure without any finish. White oak heartwood is naturally rot-resistant and can survive decades of saltwater contact with no protective coating whatsoever. They didn't reach for a finish unless the application demanded it. We've gotten so accustomed to finishing everything that we've forgotten some woods are born ready for the job as they are. 14th, wood must be read like a language. This is the thread that ties everything together. Every decision a Viking shipwright made started with observation, reading the bark, reading the rings, reading the grain direction, the species, the growth pattern, the natural curves, the moisture, the season of felling. They had a complete literacy in timber that informed every choice. We've outsourced that literacy to machines and grading stamps and moisture meters. Those tools are helpful, but they're no substitute for actually understanding what you're looking at when you pick up a board. 15th, and this is the one that sits with me the most. Machines made us stop listening to the wood. The table saw doesn't care about grain direction. The thickness planer doesn't know if the wood was felled in winter or summer. The kiln doesn't wait for the wood to be ready. Every machine in our shop is designed to overpower the material and force it into the shape we want. And that works. It works fast and it works efficiently. But somewhere in that process, we stopped paying attention to what the wood was trying to tell us. The Vikings didn't have a choice. They had to listen. And because they listened, they built things that lasted 1,000 years. We have every advantage they didn't, except the one that mattered most, which was the patience to understand the material before we cut into it. Now, let me share a few patterns I've noticed in my own work that these Viking principles really exposed. No judgment here. I did all of these for years. The first pattern is defaulting to kiln-dried lumber for everything. Most of us do this because it's convenient and it's what the lumberyard sells. But kiln-dried stock has internal stresses baked into it, and it's already past the point where you can shape it easily by hand. For certain projects, especially outdoor work or anything with curves, sourcing green or air-dried timber gives you a massive advantage in workability and long-term stability. I'm not saying throw out kiln-dried lumber. I'm saying consider what you're building before you automatically reach for it. The second pattern is ignoring species selection. We pick wood because it looks nice or because it's what we've always used. The Vikings matched species to function with absolute precision. The next time you start a project, ask yourself what this piece actually needs to do. Does it need to flex? Does it need to resist water? Does it need to absorb shock? Let the job choose the species, not the other way around. The third pattern is fighting wood movement instead of designing for it. We glue tabletops edge to edge and then wonder why they crack when the seasons change. The Vikings built ships that flexed across the North Atlantic. If they can design for movement in a vessel that has to survive open ocean, we can certainly design for it in a dining table. Use slotted screw holes. Use breadboard ends with proper elongated mortises. Let the wood do what it's going to do anyway. The fourth pattern is finishing everything. Not every project needs a film finish. Not every outdoor piece needs to be sealed in polyurethane. Sometimes the right species in the right application will outlast any coating you can put on it. White oak, black locust, old-growth cedar. These woods have survived centuries without a single coat of anything. The good news is, once you see these patterns for what they are, you start making different choices. And those choices add up. Now for that bonus tip I promised. This is something I picked up from studying how Norse shipwrights selected planking stock, and you can use it the next time you're picking through lumber. When you're standing in front of a stack of boards, pick one up and look at the end grain. If the growth rings run roughly perpendicular to the wide face, that's a quarter sawn or rift sawn board. It was cut or split radially from the log. That board will move less across its width, shed water better, and show straighter grain on the face. If the rings run roughly parallel to the face, it's flat sawn. It'll move more, cut more, and absorb water faster. The Vikings chose radially split planks every single time, and that one selection habit is something you can start practicing tomorrow without changing a single tool in your shop. I started checking end grain on every board I buy about 3 years ago, and the difference in my finished projects has been noticeable. Less movement, fewer surprises, better results. Before you head out, I want to make sure you know about my book, Secrets of the Shipyard. It goes way deeper than any single video can, with 16 chapters of Viking and naval carpentry techniques, 25 hand-drawn illustrations, and 150 pages of real hands-on knowledge. If you want to bring these old shipwright methods into your own shop, this is the guide to do it. Just scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description to get your copy. Thanks for spending time with me today, and if you have not already, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next one.